You ever have one of those days at the lake where everything seems calm and normal, and then in a heartbeat, it turns into something you'll never forget? That's exactly what happened one Saturday afternoon on Lake Michigan, right near the shore in a small town called Harbor Point. It was a perfect summer day, the kind you dream about: sun shining, waves sparkling, families on boats and kayaks. But under that calm surface, the lake had a different plan. There was a strong riptide sweeping near the shoreline, invisible unless you knew what to look for, and that day, it decided to make its presence known. The guy in question, let's call him Mark, was about 40, an average guy, visiting from Chicago, wearing nothing but swim trunks and a bright red life jacket he thought was more than enough. He'd spent the morning laughing with friends, skipping stones, sipping a soda, and soaking in the sun. And then, on a whim, he decided to swim out a little further. Just 100 feet or so, nothing serious. But as soon as he hit the water, he realized something was wrong. The waves weren't just pushing him. They were dragging him sideways, almost under him, and before he could even fully process it, the current had him spinning, fighting to keep his head above water. Panic set in fast. That instant, when you realize you can't control nature, it's terrifying. And that's when everyone on shore started to notice him struggling. Some people shouted, others grabbed phones, but no one could reach him fast enough, and honestly, the current was moving faster than most people could swim. And then, out of nowhere, a figure appeared in the water, massive, graceful, and all business. It was a Leonberger named Titan. I know, the name fits. Titan is the kind of dog you notice from across the park before he even gets close, just because of sheer size and presence. He lives with the Andersons, a couple who had rented a small lakefront cabin nearby. Titan is a gentle giant, sweet with kids, calm around strangers, but when it comes to water, he's pure instinct and muscle. He loves to swim, loves it, and somehow, that day, he seemed to sense exactly what was happening with Mark, even though they'd never met before. The moment Titan hit the water, he wasn't playing fetch or paddling around. He locked eyes on Mark and started swimming with a kind of purpose you don't see in most animals. His paws churned the water with huge, confident strokes, his ears pinned back against the wind, eyes focused, nose pointed straight at the man struggling against the riptide. And let me tell you, watching a dog that big swim through a riptide is both mesmerizing and terrifying. His body was half submerged, muscles flexing under wet fur, moving against the current that had already proven stronger than most humans could handle. And yet, he didn't hesitate. He wasn't thinking, he just acted. That's instinct. That's bravery. That's a dog who knows that someone's life depends on him, and he's not backing down. Mark, meanwhile, was starting to panic harder by the second. Every time he tried to swim toward shore, the current yanked him back. His arms were getting tired, legs trembling, and his breathing was ragged. People on shore were waving, shouting, but it was almost meaningless. He needed something in the water with him, something powerful and focused. And that's exactly what Titan became. As Titan closed in, Mark initially froze, confused, and maybe a little terrified. I mean, imagine a dog the size of a small bear suddenly appearing out of the waves and heading straight for you. It's instinctual to be wary, even in an emergency. But there was something in Titan's eyes, calm, steady, almost reassuring, that made Mark realize, okay, maybe this guy can help me. Titan reached him in a few strong strokes and started nudging Mark with his massive snout, positioning himself under Mark's chest in a way that gave him flotation and stability. It wasn't rough, it was deliberate, gentle, but firm. And then, somehow, Titan started guiding him toward the shore. Every step, every stroke, was coordinated, almost like he knew exactly how to counteract the riptide. Mark's arms were exhausted, but he clung to Titan's thick, wet fur, trusting this massive stranger to get him through the worst of it. I think it was the first moment he truly understood what people mean when they talk about animals saving lives. The waves were relentless. Small logs and floating debris bumped against them, spray stung their faces, and the wind whipped across the lake, turning Titan and Mark into an unwilling surfing duo. At one point, Mark panicked, trying to kick free, and Titan steadied him with a quick nudge of the nose, snapping him back into calm. It's that kind of intelligence you don't teach. It's instinct and trust combined. And slowly, painfully, they started making progress. Inch by inch, the shore seemed closer, And with every passing second, Mark's confidence grew. He realized he wasn't alone, that this dog, this incredible, loyal, fearless creature, was completely committed to him, body and soul. On the shore, people were starting to react more. Some were clapping, some were yelling encouragement, others just standing in awe. And then the moment everyone had been holding their breath for, the moment when Titan finally pushed Mark up onto the sand. Mark collapsed, gasping, soaked head to toe, coughing up water, but alive. And Titan, exhausted but triumphant, climbed up beside him, shaking water everywhere, tongue lolling, and just sat there. Like, mission accomplished. Mark reached down, hugging him, tears streaming down his face, and whispered something that I can still hear in my mind. You just saved my life. And Titan leaned into it, as if understanding every word. It was a scene so surreal, so perfect, it felt like a movie, but it was real, and everyone on the shore knew it. People were still clapping, some crying, some laughing at the absurdity that a dog this big, this gentle, could just wade into danger and save a complete stranger. By the time Mark was finally sitting upright, trying to catch his breath, he and Titan were already forming a bond. I mean, how could they not? They'd just survived a riptide together. Titan sat faithfully by his side, occasionally licking his hands, occasionally nuzzling his shoulder, and Mark just kept patting him over and over, repeating, thank you, like it wasn't enough. And in that moment, it didn't matter that they were strangers, that they'd just met, that Mark didn't know this dog's name. They were bonded for life, forged by adrenaline, trust, and sheer survival instinct. Later that day, when the Andersons came running down to see what all the commotion was, they just laughed. They already knew Titan was special, but seeing him save someone like that was something entirely different. They wrapped Titan in towels, gave him treats, and let Mark sit and recover while everyone told the story over and over. And Mark? He couldn't stop thanking Titan and the Andersons. By the end of the afternoon, it was clear. This stranger who had nearly drowned had gained a best friend for life, and the dog? Well, the dog had solidified his place as a legend at Lake Michigan. And that's where we leave it for part 1, because the rest, the struggle through the waves, the moments of panic, the small victories and close calls, is where the story really gets intense. By the end of it, you're going to feel like you've been swimming with Titan yourself, heart in your throat, wondering if they'll make it, and cheering like crazy when they do. Once Titan had Mark up on the sand, most people would have thought the danger was over. I mean, you'd think the worst part was past, right? But Lake Michigan is a tricky beast, especially when it decides to show off. That riptide wasn't done, not by a long shot. Even just a few feet from shore, the current was still strong enough to drag a grown man under, and it wasn't subtle. There were moments where the water sloshed back and forth unpredictably, pulling at Mark's legs, and every instinct screamed, stay low, stay still, stay alive. And Titan? Well, Titan wasn't about to let him face that alone. Mark had just started catching his breath when a sudden surge of water hit him from the side. He stumbled, slipped, and almost fell back into the current. Panic spiked instantly. You could see it in his eyes, the same fear he'd had when the riptide first grabbed him. But Titan reacted faster than any human could. He lunged forward, massive paws digging into the sand, muscles flexing as he positioned himself between Mark and the water. He nudged Mark upright with his snout, almost like he was saying, I've got you. Stay with me. And in that instant, you realized just how much this dog understood. He wasn't just following instinct. He was improvising, adapting to the chaos around him. And then the riptide struck again, stronger this time, pulling Mark sideways. His arms flailed, the panic rising in his chest. People on the shore shouted encouragement. Some started moving toward the water with ropes, but it was almost irrelevant. Titan had taken control. He grabbed hold of Mark's life jacket with his mouth, careful, gentle, but firm, and started swimming with him through the uneven waves. Every stroke was precise, every movement deliberate. It was like watching a rescue team in action, only the leader had fur for legs and a tail wagging like he owned the place. What made it even more intense was how uncooperative the situation was. Floating debris, small logs, branches, and even a stray inflatable kayak were being swept along with the current, bouncing toward them unpredictably. One piece of driftwood nearly hit Mark in the head, and Titan reacted in a heartbeat, twisting his body to block it, letting it bounce harmlessly off his side. I remember thinking, no human could have moved that fast and stayed calm. The precision, the courage, the sheer physicality, it was unbelievable. At one point, Mark's panic nearly got the best of him. He tried to kick off Titan's back to grab a floating branch, and the dog gave a sharp, gentle nudge, reminding him, "Don't fight me. Trust me." And somehow, in the middle of that chaos, Mark did. He stopped struggling, clung to Titan's massive fur, and started breathing. That moment of surrender, accepting that this animal was the key to survival, was powerful. It was raw, human, and completely cinematic. Titan's swim was grueling. The current fought him every inch of the way, water splashing over his head, waves pounding his chest, yet he kept going. You could see his fur matted, muscles trembling with effort, but his eyes never left Mark. Every so often, Mark would slip, panic, flail, and Titan would correct him, repositioning him so that he stayed balanced. There were moments when it looked hopeless, when the waves were relentless and the distance to safety seemed infinite, and yet Titan didn't waver. He just kept swimming, paw after paw, inch after inch, carrying Mark toward the relative calm of shallower water. And the crowd on shore? They were going crazy. Some were yelling encouragement, others were frozen in disbelief, and a few were recording everything on their phones. But honestly, the crowd didn't matter at that point. Titan wasn't performing for them. He wasn't looking for applause. He was focused, completely absorbed in saving this man. Every instinct, every ounce of strength was dedicated to that single mission. And Mark, somewhere between terror and relief, finally began to trust the process. He stopped fighting the current with brute force and allowed Titan to guide him, which, in retrospect, is probably what saved him. Then came the near-miss moment. A stray log, big enough to knock someone out, was floating straight toward them, and Mark froze. But Titan, in one fluid motion, twisted his body to shield Mark, letting the log glance harmlessly off his side. It was pure instinct, pure courage, and pure muscle power. The people on shore collectively gasped, and for a moment, you could see the disbelief on their faces. This dog, this stranger, was actually saving someone from a death sentence. As they approached the shallow end, Titan's pace slowed slightly, but his focus didn't. The waves were smaller, but the water was still rough enough to knock Mark off balance. Titan adjusted, nudged him upright, and slowly, carefully, guided him toward the sand. And then, finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they reached the shore completely. Mark collapsed onto the sand, chest heaving, water dripping off his face, legs trembling, and for the first time, he allowed himself to feel pure relief. Titan wasn't done yet, of course. He shook off the water with a dramatic flourish, splattering everyone nearby, then flopped down beside Mark, tongue lolling, eyes gleaming with pride and satisfaction. Mark reached down immediately, hugging him tight, tears streaming, whispering words like, "I don't know how to thank you," over and over. And Titan, he leaned into it, enjoying the moment, as if to say, "I don't need thanks. I just did what I had to do." And that's when the human connection started forming. The Andersons, Titan's owners, rushed down to the shore, towels in hand, worried sick but proud. They wrapped Titan in blankets, fussed over him like a king, and checked to make sure Mark was okay. And Mark? Well, Mark was still trying to process what had happened. One minute he was fighting for his life in Lake Michigan. The next he was lying on sand with a massive dog next to him, feeling the warm sun on his face and the wet fur against his hands. He couldn't stop smiling, couldn't stop crying, and couldn't stop laughing at the absurdity that a dog, yes, a dog, had just saved him from drowning. By the time everyone calmed down a little, Mark and Titan had already bonded. You could see it in the way Mark kept touching Titan, whispering in that slightly shaky voice humans tend to use when overwhelmed with gratitude. Titan would nuzzle him, wag his tail, occasionally paw at him playfully, but always alert, always aware. It was clear this wasn't just a rescue. It was the beginning of a friendship forged in life-and-death circumstances, one that would last a lifetime. People around started joking. "That's one friend you don't ever let go of." Or, "Who needs a lifeguard when you have Titan?" And you could see the humor in Mark's eyes despite the adrenaline still coursing through his system. There's something about surviving a near-death experience with a loyal, heroic dog that makes you laugh at the absurdity and marvel at the miracle at the same time. Later that day, on dry land, Mark kept telling everyone how he owed his life to Titan. "I don't even know this dog," he kept saying. And he just knew what to do. And Titan, as if understanding every word, kept resting his massive head on Mark's lap, eyes half closed, completely at peace. It was a quiet, human-animal moment that left everyone watching teary-eyed and speechless. And the best part? That one afternoon by Lake Michigan changed everything. Mark and Titan, strangers an hour ago, were now inseparable. Mark started visiting the Andersons regularly. They'd go swimming together, Titan showing off his pride and saving his friend, Mark still joking nervously about not testing the Riptide next time. And every time they were near the water, you could see it. The bond, the trust, the understanding between man and dog, formed under fire and cemented forever. By the time the storm of adrenaline faded and the waves finally calmed enough for Mark to sit upright, a strange kind of quiet had settled over Lake Michigan. Not the silence of nature, not the lull after a storm, but the quiet that comes after a miracle. The water still lapped gently at the shore, the wind whispered through the trees, but there was a sense that something extraordinary had just happened, something that would linger in the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. And, of course, Titan, the Leonberger, was at the center of it all. Mark sat there, shivering and soaked, chest still heaving, but alive. And every few seconds, he would reach down, pat Titan's head, hug him around the neck, whispering, "I can't believe you saved me," as though saying it louder would somehow make the gratitude more real. And Titan, he just leaned into it, eyes half closed, tail wagging lazily, completely calm now that the worst of the danger was over. It was hard not to look at that dog and feel a little awe, a little respect, and a lot of gratitude. You could see in his posture, in the way he settled next to Mark, that he understood he had done something important, but he wasn't showing off. This wasn't about heroics for the crowd. This was about loyalty, instinct, and a kind of bravery that you rarely see outside of movies. Around them, people who had been watching from the shore were starting to emerge from their stunned silence. Some were clapping, some laughing in disbelief, some quietly murmuring, "Wow," over and over. Everyone recognized that they'd just seen something incredible, a stranger saved by a dog, a life pulled back from the jaws of a riptide, and a bond formed in seconds that would last a lifetime. And for Mark, the moment was life-changing. He wasn't just alive. He had a new perspective, a new friend, and a newfound appreciation for the kind of heroism animals are capable of. Later that day, as everyone got out of their wet clothes and tried to warm up in the sun, Mark and Titan's connection became obvious to anyone paying attention. Mark wouldn't let go of him. Every time Titan moved, Mark laughed or joked, "Hey, careful, don't drag me back in." And people watching laughed too, because there was this mix of relief, disbelief, and humor that only comes from surviving something terrifying together. It was a human moment, a dog moment, a life moment, all rolled into one. The Andersons, Titan's owners, were naturally proud, but also a little amused. They had always known Titan was big and strong and good in water, but even they couldn't have predicted that he'd rescue a complete stranger from a riptide. They wrapped him in towels, fussed over him, gave him treats, and let Mark fuss over him too. And Mark? He kept patting Titan, talking to him, promising that he'd come back, that he owed him his life, that he'd never forget this. It was clear that for both human and dog, this wasn't just a one-time event. Something had shifted in their relationship forever. And the thing about moments like this is how they ripple. Other people on the beach started talking to each other, retelling the story as it happened, shaking their heads, marveling at how a single animal had changed the outcome of a life-threatening situation. Some neighbors joked that Mark now had the best friend he didn't know he needed, and others simply nodded, recognizing the truth of it. And in the background, Titan flopped down in the sand, tongue lolling, exhausted but content, completely unaware of how famous he had already become in that little stretch of Lake Michigan. As the day turned into evening, Mark and the Andersons talked about keeping in touch. They promised each other that Mark would come back, that he'd visit Titan regularly, and that they'd make sure he knew just how important Titan had been. And in a strange way, the riptide that had nearly taken him became a connector, bringing together people and a dog who would have otherwise been strangers. It's amazing to think how a single act of courage, instinct, and loyalty can create bonds that last forever. There's also something deeper to take from this story. Titan wasn't trained for this. He wasn't given instructions. He simply acted on instinct, guided by his bond with humans and his understanding of the danger. And that's something remarkable about dogs. They can read fear, they can sense danger, and they can act with a clarity and determination that even humans sometimes lack. Watching him save Mark, you realize that heroism doesn't always come from experience, rank, or training. It can come from the heart, the instincts, and the courage to act when it matters most. And for Mark, that lesson hit hard. He would later tell friends that day, "I've never had a connection like that with anyone, or anything, in my life. I owe my life to a dog I didn't even know existed 2 hours ago." And he wasn't exaggerating. In just a few minutes, the relationship between him and Titan had been cemented, built on trust, gratitude, and survival. And for anyone watching, that's inspiring. It's a reminder that we aren't alone, that help can come from the most unexpected places, and that courage can wear fur, have 4 legs, and wag its tail. By nightfall, the beach had cleared. The waves were gentle again, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows, and the Riptide had become just a memory of a near disaster. But Mark sat there with Titan, hand on his back, thinking about how life can change in an instant. That kind of reflection doesn't happen often, and it's the kind of story you carry with you, repeating it in your mind, sharing it with friends, retelling it to remind yourself how fragile life can be, and how unexpectedly beautiful it is when someone, or something, steps in at exactly the right moment. And of course, the friendship didn't end there. Over the weeks and months that followed, Mark returned to Harbor Point regularly. He and Titan would swim together, walk along the beach, and just enjoy the kind of companionship that only comes from having survived something extraordinary together. People who knew the story joked that Mark now had the bravest, wettest, most loyal best friend in the world. And honestly, they weren't wrong. Titan had shown that loyalty and courage aren't limited to humans. He had bridged the gap between stranger and friend in a way that was almost magical, and the memory of that day would stay with both of them forever. So here's the thing to think about after hearing this story. What would you do if you were in Mark's place? Could you have trusted a stranger, a massive dog in the middle of a dangerous riptide, to save you? Could you have let instinct, courage, and loyalty guide you to safety? And maybe more importantly, how often do we underestimate the animals in our lives? The ones who love us unconditionally, the ones who might step up in moments when we least expect it? Titan's story reminds us that bravery comes in many forms, and sometimes, the most powerful hero in your life might have fur, legs, and a heart bigger than anything you've ever imagined. So next time you see a dog at the beach, or a friend helping someone out, remember that heroism isn't always about medals or recognition. Sometimes it's about instinct, trust, and the willingness to act when it counts. Titan proved that in one unforgettable afternoon, and Mark proved that we all have the capacity to recognize and honor that courage when it happens. And I'll leave you with this. If you've ever had an animal or a friend step in at exactly the right moment in your life, share that story. Because stories like Titan and Mark's deserve to be told, remembered, and celebrated. By the time the sun set over Lake Michigan, Mark and Titan were sitting side by side on the sand, wet, tired, and forever changed. The waves lapped gently at their feet. The wind carried the last warmth of the day, and somewhere in that moment, everyone watching knew that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a friendship forged in danger, loyalty proven in action, and a reminder that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. Sometimes, they even have fur.